It's the week ending Saturday the 14th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the Taliban continuing to gain ground in Afghanistan, Virginia Giuffre filing a lawsuit against Prince Andrew alleging sexual abuse, and Europe's highest ever temperature, 48.8 degrees centigrade, apparently registered in Sicily. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Sorcha Bradley, plus freelancers Abdulwahab Tahan, and from the excellent daily podcast The Retrospectors, it's Arion McNicoll. Abdul, you're kicking us off. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, Russian mercenaries leaving a trail of evidence.
We know that one of their primary remits was to protect the Palmyra area. That area is really the heart of oil and gas production in Syria. We saw spreadsheets with millions and millions of rubles being transferred in exchange for providing infrastructure security and perimeter security and securing the oil and gas facilities. The Wagner Group would get a portion of the take from the production, basically.
Professor Candice Rando, author of Decoding the Wagner Group, speaking to BBC News on Tuesday. Abdul, what is the Wagner Group and what's the story?
So the Wagner Group is an unofficial Russian mercenaries group that has been linked to Russia, and Russia refuses to say that it's officially there. When Putin asked about the Russian presence in Libya, he declined that they are on official visit or official business. He said that these people do not represent Russia, do not represent their business. But Wagner Group has been reported and seen in Syria, in Africa, where they protect gas and oil. They have their own mines, and they use a lot of high-tech weapons that require a lot of training. And all of this has been secret, and we don't know a lot about them.
So what's happened this week?
So this week, new evidence came to light. So while in Libya, while they were retreating from one of their places, they accidentally left a tablet. And this tablet was recovered by the government, and BBC got access to it. And the researchers looked at it, and they saw a spreadsheet, and they saw a lot of new evidence that they're using high-tech weapons such as tanks only operated by the Russian army. And you would only need Russian army training to use them, and rifles. And this is a huge new evidence that could link them officially to Russia.
Sorcha, at the risk of stating the obvious, why would Russia be using them? Why would they have a mercenary gang?
Yeah, so essentially, this group is known for committing, or has been accused of committing, several war crimes for breaking international law. And it's a great way for Russia to circumnavigate international law, and also to pretend it's not them, to pretend that they aren't trying to kind of exert influence. And one expert described kind of the Russian government's attitude to the group as, let people join this thing and we'll see what the result is. If it works out well, we can use it to our advantage. And if it turns out badly, then we had nothing to do with it. And I think that kind of encapsulates exactly why they're being used in the area.
I mean, Arion, I think a lot of us remember back in 2014, during the annexation of Crimea, the so-called green people who turned up. That was on the news and it was clear that they were Russian. But I thought watching that was basically a one-off because of the unique circumstances in Crimea. Obviously, Putin had to tread carefully there. He was clearly breaking the law. But some Crimeans considered themselves Russian, some Ukrainian. That seemed like, if you're Putin, an elegant way around the situation. I didn't realise that this group of mercenaries have continued evolving since then.
Yes. I mean, the reality is that Russia has projected its influence in all sorts of parts of the world, sometimes via its own military and sometimes via these sort of rather more deniable means like hiring mercenaries of the Wagner Group style. So, I mean, Libya itself has been a total mess since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. And since then, there are so many different groups that have interest in the country, including the Government of National Accord, which is recognised by the UN, being backed by Turkey, Italy and Qatar, and the rival self-styled Libyan National Army, which is backed by Egypt, France and the UAE. So there's a lot of different groups that are both overtly and covertly operating within the area, and Russia has also been largely backing the LNA, but in a fairly surreptitious way, and that's where the Wagner Group comes into it.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, Abdul, that Arion uses the word surreptitious like it's on the down low. I've seen some estimates saying that the group is as large as 10,000 operatives. I mean, it's extraordinary that they've managed to stay secretive at all.
It is estimated that it is 10,000, and it is not really a secret. It's just we don't have evidence of their official contract. In a couple of contractors who gave kind of testimonies, they said that a lot of people are being recruited in Russia, where they train next to the Russian, one of the Russian bases, and then they get sent around the world. Wherever there is a conflict or people wanted to do some dirty work, they get sent there. So, for example, Syria was one of their hotbeds where they used to operate near gas and oil fields, where they would operate, get all the gas, get a lot of money, get paid. And all of these people are kind of poor people who wanted to make some money. So they joined these groups. Now, one of the things that Russia has been doing in Syria is kind of treating Syria as an experiment. So they have tested 320 new weapons there. And one of the latest things that happened in Syria, and kind of the only time that there has been any official lawsuit against these groups, is that in Syria, where there is evidence that these groups have tortured and killed a civilian. And this case has been ongoing recently. Of course, the only place where a lot of Syrians press charges, which is pretty much Germany, where a lot of Syrians are trying to try these officials or from the Syrian regime or a mercenaries group or anyone who committed human rights violations.
Sorcha, you were kind of nodding there when Abdul was saying that Syria is a hotbed for this mercenary group. We've talked about Crimea kind of being the laboratory. If this is all practice, like, what's the end game, do you think? What's going to happen next?
I mean, I think it's quite well documented that Putin wants to kind of gain influence in the Middle East and in North Africa and to erode US influence in the area particularly. And this is one strategy in which he can potentially do that and become a key player in the area and use it to influence Russia's stature not only there but on the global stage. So this is kind of potentially one method that Putin and the Kremlin is using to do that.
Yeah, and I think that there's every reason why Russia would want to maintain the secrecy of its operations, particularly in Libya, because ultimately, as Sorcha is saying, they want to align themselves with whoever comes out on top. And it's very unclear whether it's going to be this Government of National Accord or whether it's going to be the LNA or some other group entirely. And so for now, Russia just needs to keep a low profile and be backing the groups that it's backing almost secretively so that it can deny that it was on the wrong side of history when the other group wins.
Do you think other nations are at this as well? I mean, do you think the US, do you think Britain, do you think European countries are backing mercenary groups?
Absolutely. And it's known, for example, that the group that's in the ascendancy in the east of the country that's run by this General Haftar has been actively recruiting mercenaries from Chad and the Sudan. And Turkey has been implicated in bringing over thousands of Syrians to fight on the other side for the GNA. So, yeah, so there's definitely many different kinds of mercenaries operating in the country.
And Abdul, it's worth mentioning that this story came to light from open source investigation. Explain what happened there.
Well, open source investigation is a new thing that collects information online. So whatever information available online, from people uploading photos to posts to tweets, Instagram posts. So anything that you would see online that's available for public, a number of researchers or research organizations such as Bellingcat would document it, get it, and then analyze it. And using available sources such as Google Maps, they would try to geolocate exactly where these places appeared, and then they would try to link a lot of different things to it in order to make a full picture of what happened. And that's how in Syria people were able to put an evidence together to show that this group, the Wagner group, was responsible for torturing a civilian. And there are a number of cases that are going online. This case in Libya, the Wagner group, they left a couple of maps and spreadsheets about transactions and names of people. So open source investigation helped collect photos of these people in Crimea and in Libya with testimonies of people on the ground. And together they pieced a very good evidence, I guess.
There are downsides to this type of investigation, though, aren't there, Sorcha?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, there are a lot of upsides, obviously. In this particular instance, we were able to find out things that we would never be able to do with on-the-ground reporting, because obviously it's a very difficult country to get into. Wagner is a secretive organisation. They don't officially exist. So being embedded with them would be almost impossible. So traditional reporting would never work in these circumstances. And we've been able to find out a lot about them through using these techniques. But essentially very labour intensive, and it requires a lot of analytical work. You have to find out what's valid sources of information, which can be really hard to do with kind of open source networks. You have to verify potentially misleading or false information. So essentially there's lots of scope for it to be inaccurate or wrong. But if you have brilliant journalists, which the BBC does, then you can get very, very useful bits of reporting and bits of information done that you otherwise would be essentially impossible.
One of those really interesting bits of information that came out from the location and capture of this tablet that was given to the BBC was not only the high-level military stuff, like manuals for anti-personnel mines and IEDs and that sort of stuff, but also the really personal stuff of the person who owned the tablet. And apparently a number of books had been uploaded to it, including A Game of Thrones and A Guide to Making Wine and Mein Kampf. So quite a diverse range of interests that the person who owned this tablet had.
Bit of mercenary desert island discs there.
Yeah. It's interesting to see that side of the personality behind someone involved in the Wagner group that, you know, who is a real person as well as being a covert military operative.
And finally on this, Abdul, do you see them growing? Because, you know, they have been thoroughly outed now. You know, if not directly provably linked to Russia, here we are talking about them. There's the article on the BBC. The Wagner Group's becoming a thing, increasingly common currency to say. So then do they lose their power of anonymity? You know, is it a bit like the two blokes who went to Salisbury? You know, once you know who they are, you can't really deploy them effectively anymore.
Well, all publicity is good publicity. And there's no shortage of war in the Middle East or any other places in Africa or other places. So I don't see them ever getting smaller or disappearing. I think they're just getting bigger. I don't know what's it like for advertising to join them in Russia. Maybe they're just like advertising for terrorist group in the Middle East. I don't know. You should get leaflets from people and then you can choose. I really have no idea what's it like, the PR department.
I mean, do you think there's sort of a threat actually to the Russian army?
They're not. I don't think they are a threat to the Russian army because, again, their numbers are small. They're being organized by people from the Russian army. So they're under control. And Russia doesn't care about them. For example, when 200 people were killed in Syria, Russia said these people are not our people. So they were killed in an airstrike by the USA, and Russia didn't really care about him. So obviously they don't mean anything to Russia.
All right. Sorcha, you're up next after this. Okay, Sorcha, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Have we decided to give up the fight against climate change to protect our mental health?
Over the past several years, climate change has moved from an abstract idea to a reality in many of our lives, a reality that has a lot of us increasingly worried. An APA survey in February 2020 found that 2/3 of American adults said that they felt at least a little eco-anxiety, which is defined as worry or concern about climate change and its effects. And nearly half of those under age 34 said that stress about climate change affects their daily lives.
A clip from Kim Mills's Speaking of Psychology podcast earlier this year. Sorcha, what's the story?
Yeah, so this idea of eco-anxiety or climate anxiety has kind of come to the fore again because this week the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change published a devastating report on the effects of man-made climate change on the planet. And obviously this sparked a lot of apocalyptic and really scary headlines. And that has caused lots of people to feel, as you can kind of see on social media, this feeling of eco-anxiety, of climate anxiety, which is a relatively new phenomenon, but I think is becoming more and more prevalent as we hear more devastating stories about the effects of climate change.
You think, or you have evidence to show?
Well, I think obviously for young people, it's almost the defining fear of our times. And a recent survey showed that half of child and adolescent psychiatrists in England are currently seeing patients who are distressed about the state of the environment. And that's also relatively high across all age groups. So 47% of psychiatrists are also seeing people across all age groups who are concerned about climate change and what that might mean. So I think that gives a sense of actually people are becoming very concerned as we see more and more stories. And also I think as it becomes more present in our daily lives, I think for a long, long time, maybe the last 20 years, it felt like something that was going to happen in the distant future. But actually, as we just heard, Europe's recorded its highest ever temperature in Sicily. And so it's becoming something that, in particularly in Europe, we're becoming increasingly aware of.
But Arion, if people feel fear as a result of reading the headlines following the global climate report, that was the point. It documented the unprecedented ways that the Earth's climate is changing. It documented the inevitable, irreversible changes. It said it is more likely than not that the world will reach 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels at some point in the next 20 years. The point is for people to read it, feel scared and do something. So actually, this is good news, isn't it?
Right. I saw an interview with a woman called Caroline Hickman, who's a psychotherapist and researcher at the University of Bath. And she said that this just is not something that we should be pathologizing, that the response of climate anxiety or eco-anxiety, climate depression, climate rage, call it what you will, is perfectly natural in the face of this kind of apocalyptic reporting. And she said, I'd wonder why someone wasn't feeling anxious after reading these reports. And I think there's truth to that. I think that maybe what we need to be concerned about is what Sorcha was talking about young people feeling especially concerned. And I did see a study by Yale and George Mason University that found that young people are particularly sensitive to eco-anxiety, not only because they're the people who are going to face most of this more than the older generations, but also because of the increased sensitivity of the young brain to the effects of stresses. So I think that young minds are particularly susceptible to this sort of newfound type of fear, and that's what we should be focusing on.
Is this a global thing, Abdul, do you think? Or are we, as Sorcha was kind of alluding to there, really just talking about young people in the West being worried about this because, we're now seeing pictures of tube stations flooding in Europe. But actually, if you're a young person in India, arguably, A, you have other things to worry about, and B, your national strength depends at the moment on the government continuing to create a lot of carbon.
You are very right, Olly. This is a very European problem, a very first world problem, and very, I think, middle class problem. I don't think people, even in Europe, from poor backgrounds, would really care about climate change or CO2 emissions, or people, for example, living in camps or in Calais, they wouldn't really care about it because they got other things to worry about. So, for example, for me, coming from Syria and now living in Hong Kong, but I was living in England before, I would look at it, I was like, yeah, there's a lot of commotion about climate change, but where is all the anger about how war affects climate change? Every time people in England or in the West, they charge you 5p for a plastic bag, so they encourage you to use to recycle your plastic bags, but nobody talks about missiles or grenades or war, the effect of that. I'm not really sure that recycling a plastic bag would save anything, or people worrying about it around the world with things. And no, I don't think, from what I can tell you, from the people I know that have migrated from Syria to Europe, I don't think this is on their top 5 concerns.
Even for the people that are very concerned, Sorcha, that you identify, is it kind of a feeling of hopelessness, really, that they're feeling, because it's not just that the issue is out there, it's that there's very little personal autonomy. There's very little you can do about the amount China is polluting the world.
Yeah, I think that is such a key element of it. I think, as Abdul was just saying, and as the report rightly points out, it's not recycling your bean cans and not buying a plastic bag. That's not what's going to save the environment. That's not what's going to reverse climate change. It is fundamentally changing how we kind of live in the world, how companies produce greenhouse gases, and essentially getting to carbon net zero. It's big actions that are important. I think people more and more are starting to realise this, and you get that kind of sense of futility because, you know, all people are being told is to do is, you know, recycle, reduce your carbon footprint. But actually, as an individual, it doesn't really do much. It's these big pushes for change that we need. And I also think fear is not particularly a motivating factor. Lots of, you know, research has been done into it, and actually interest and hope is much more motivational. And if we kind of sell this narrative that there's nothing that can be done, then that actually stops big action being taken, which is actually what we need.
It's difficult as well, Arion, it seems to me, because the big action that's necessary limits your own life. You know, so you can look at kind of progressive movements in the last 50 years where young people have made a difference. Racial equality, gay marriage, social phenomena like that, where the people campaigning for them were actually campaigning for more rights for their friends. You know, if you're campaigning for governments to really do something about climate change, what you're basically saying is make sure I don't go on holiday.
Yes. I mean, I think that there is a growing sense of awareness from people in the West that making personal changes will be increasingly impactful on their own quality of life, so that we won't be able to just get planes to whatever holiday destination whenever we want if we do want to make a personal difference to climate change. And I think that is worth highlighting. But I think that people also do know that the major changes that need to be made here are at a really high level. You know, that there's only so much impact that your personal choices can make on the environment as a whole. It's got to be done by the, whatever it is, 100 companies that are contributing the greatest amount of carbon emission in the world, and the governments that are supporting them in doing so. So I think that it is a big question. But I think back on the matter of eco-anxiety, I think that what we need to focus on is what we can do personally, you know, that personal aspect to get ourselves through it. And I read this piece from the American Psychiatric Association that said that you need to do a combination of practical stuff, which is, you know, talking to other people, volunteering and making greener choices, all of those sort of things, but also personal things, including kind of trying to find ways to boost your self-resilience, to know when to disengage. I think that's hugely important, not to just be caught up in those cycles of bad news that are being pumped to us from the media, and also knowing when is the right time if you are feeling particularly anxious to talk to a professional. And that shouldn't be forgotten about. If you're feeling super distressed about this, there is a time when talking to a psychiatrist is right.
Abdul, you're frowning.
I was laughing at the word choice of Arion, and when he said strong and resilient, and I don't want to be strong and resilient. I want to be weak and vulnerable, to be honest with you. I don't want to be asked to do things I don't want to do because I'm at the very low food chain, right? If you want to, solve all this, go tax the billionaire who created all this mess. Don't tell me to stop flying. Don't tell me to be strong and resilient and change it and change that. And don't buy, a plastic bag. Go tax all these billionaires. They're strong and resilient.
Well, Sorcha, in terms of how this affects your generation and the choices of you and your friends, as young people go into industry, I'm talking about in a system of capitalism here, they are being asked, aren't they, to contribute to the problem. You know, if you look at it that way. If you have eco-anxiety and you're someone who wants to do your bit, would you go and work for an oil company to earn a big salary? Would you feel comfortable advertising products on social media that are essentially unnecessary, gratuitous things for people to have and are contributing to a waste problem? All those things play on your mind, don't they? And the very choices you're making in our society to get ahead.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think obviously people make their own personal choices, and I'm sure some people wouldn't choose to work for an oil company. But essentially, obviously, under how the world currently operates, there's no escape from it. There's nothing that you particularly can do. You living your life, driving your car, buying your groceries, heating your house, all these things contribute to climate change in some way. What I think is, it's not actually about worrying about those small things at all. It is about pushing for this kind of bigger change, demanding more of your governments, demanding more of large corporations. And that's where you can see actual meaningful change, rather than trying to too much worry about you as an individual, because I think that, madness lies that way, and you'll never be able to, you can't solve these issues by yourself.
I do wonder, Arion, whether this is now going to be the new stick for the anti-woke brigade to beat young people with. They spend all day on their phones. They'd rather use a hashtag than get their hands dirty, and they spend all day worrying that the world's ending.
Yeah, quite. But, I mean, if the world is actually in danger of ending, then, again, this is not something that we can pathologize. It's what's happening, and we need to, and some amount of worry is right. That said, there's any number of sticks that the anti-woke brigade will be able to pick up to beat those woke people that they disagree with. So yeah, I guess it's another potential avenue of criticism.
Arion, I will be coming to you next after this. Okay, Arion, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, there have been a McFlurry of legal developments for the right to repair movement.
Who wants to go get ice cream?
Me! May I take your order?
Can I get an ice cream cone?
We don't have ice cream right now.
Not today.
Not today.
Maybe tomorrow or something.
Or next week, I don't know.
Does that happen a lot, like that the machine's down?
Yeah, in this one, yeah.
Okay.
YouTuber Johnny Harris there, back in April, sharing the real reason McDonald's ice cream machines are always broken. 7.8 million views. Seriously, why am I wasting my time on podcasting? Arion, this is obviously one of the big issues of our time, so let's tackle this head on first of all. Why are McDonald's ice cream machines always broken, if that is indeed true and not a clear exaggeration?
Right, so as we heard from the clip just there, it is actually true that these machines do break down an awful lot. The news this week is that a court in California has sided with a company that's trying to step in and fix these perpetually broken machines. The case is a little bit complicated, so bear with me, but I'll just sort of run you through the basics of it. It centers around the fact that this company, Taylor, that builds the McFlurry machine, largely has a monopoly on the machine's repairs, which is part of why they always seem to be broken. The other reason is that, according to the tech website Gizmodo, the machines are inherently quite fragile, so they're trying to deal with this change between the extreme cold of trying to make ice cream and the intense heat that goes through them when they are cleaned.
I mean, this is all very fascinating for those of us who just like a frosty treat in the afternoon. But so what? I mean, why are broken McFlurry machines your story of the week?
Okay, so this rival company to Taylor, a company called Kitsch, has recently developed this diagnostics tool that will allow McDonald's franchisees to do their own repair. And this sort of ties into this really broad question of the growing right to repair movement that is progressing in a lot of different countries, that advocates for the ability not just of individual users to be able to fix their own smartphones or laptops or whatever, but also for big companies to not be dependent on sort of sub-companies that are selling them machinery that they then have some rights over the repair of, and therefore their hands are kind of tied when these machines break down.
Okay, so it's a right to repair story. I mean, Sorcha, it's difficult to play devil's advocate on this one because I am someone who every 4 years throws away an iPhone when I would much rather be able to take it somewhere that could repair it, because Apple have a similar system, don't they, where they supply the parts, they do the repairs, and it gets to a certain age and they're like, sorry, software's been updated. But at the same time, Apple do make the phone that I love, and, in our system, they deserve to profit and capitalize from that. I mean, if you're the company who makes the McFlurry machine, why shouldn't you have a system where you're the people who get to repair it and profit on it?
I suppose, but I think there's a sense that it's dishonest and profiteering, essentially, which, okay, yeah, maybe companies are allowed to turn a profit, but should they be allowed to do it in that way? And I actually think it's amazing how much planned obsolescence has just become a part of our everyday life and we completely take it for granted and we don't even question it anymore. Like you're saying, how many iPhones have I had over the past few years? Whereas I probably had my first phone for 3 or 4 years and it probably would have survived a nuclear apocalypse. It could have survived anything. So it is incredible how quickly we've just accepted this. And I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. In fact, I think it's an incredibly bad thing. It's bad for the environment, obviously, because we throw away all this perfectly good equipment that we could use. Very, very little of it actually gets recycled. I think actually only 20% of kind of e-products or technology gets recycled. So we're just creating all this junk, basically, when actually we could repurpose it, reuse it, and, you know, use it for decades, potentially.
I suppose the unique thing about this situation, Abdul, is that if you're a McDonald's franchisee, you don't have a choice over which ice cream machine you choose. So that's the thing, isn't it? It's one thing for the person who designs the machine to say, I'm going to repair it. But the idea of capitalism is then another company can come along and create a rival product that's easier to repair. And obviously, if that's not the one endorsed by McDonald's, your hands are tied there.
You're right. As a franchisee, you don't have any choice but to use this tailor-made machine. But, however, as a union, or if every franchisee's owner decide, to strike or is prepared to walk away if McDonald's doesn't budge.
It's always gone really well, hasn't it, for fast food workers in the past, unionisation?
Or if the customers decided that, hey, listen, we've had enough. Every time we go there, the machine is broken. We're never going to buy ice cream from here ever again until this gets, seriously treated and solved. I think McDonald's would listen because, their profits would really take a blow. But again, there is a problem here of getting everyone behind a solution. And it's on paper, it's very simple and easy to do, but it's really difficult to mobilize the crowd to do that.
And there's also an argument, isn't there, Arion, that without the right to repair, you end up further dividing society between the haves and the have-nots. Talk me through that.
Yes, exactly right. The Guardian had an article this week that told 4 stories that really tried to show why the right to repair movement was really something quite imperative. And one of the people that they were highlighting was this woman, Amber Schmidt, who runs her own non-profit repairs for electronics shop. And she was saying that part of the reason that we don't have a massive amount of trickle down with electronics. It still is a thing where people over a certain wage level tend to have the latest generation of smartphone and high-level laptop, and people under a certain wage level really do not, is because after people are done with their iPhone, there just isn't the ability to keep them going for years and years and allowing them to trickle down into the hands of poorer people who otherwise wouldn't have access to a smartphone. And it's astonishing the percentage of people in the US, at least, according to The Guardian, who still don't have access to smartphones even in 2021. So I think that there is an access question that's being considered here. But I was also just thinking about the way that any film or TV show set before about the 1990s would have someone tinkering about in their garage fixing their own car, and you just don't have that sense of personal empowerment anymore to get the things that you own and when they break down, pull them apart and fix them, because A, the tools and manuals and information on how to fix things aren't available, and B, companies don't tend to allow you to do that without invalidating the warranty that they've given you for the product in the first place. So I just think that sense that we could fix up our broken washing machine is something that would be great to be able to get back.
It's also frustrating, isn't it, just as a consumer, Sorcha, the amount of products that have software in now. I know that we have the Internet of Things, and so theoretically it's nice to be able to set your washing machine from your phone when you're on the bus on the way home or whatever. But that means that you have a lot of companies that aren't necessarily that expert in creating computer software, putting software on things that otherwise would be fixable. I mean, a McFlurry machine, it doesn't seem to me, requires a software update, but that's the situation we're in.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that same Guardian article, what really stood out to me is that tractors now rely on being connected to the internet and technology, and that completely blew my mind. And the farmer in that story was potentially facing ruin because the company couldn't get out there to fix the technology that ran the tractor. The farmer couldn't just call a mechanic or fix the tractor himself. He had to outsource it and he had to wait. And I think in the end, he ended up going back to kind of a 40-year-old tractor and using old technology. So there is a sense that if you can fix it, it's more reliable. And also, actually, there is a greater sense of security because, all is not lost. Everything's not ruined if it breaks down. And I think it does kind of take away a lot of agency from our everyday lives if we have to rely on outside companies to come in and fix the products that we rely on and have come to rely on almost totally.
I do wonder as well, Abdul, whether some environmental policies, to hark back to our last story, have had the inadvertent effect of accelerating some of this too, because if you ban petrol cars, for example, then the 50-year-old tractor isn't an option anymore, is it? You have to go for the new one that has the software on it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It is. The science has developed. So and as a society, we have developed and moved on. So we cannot really fix our cars because they're not mechanic anymore. They are kind of smart cars. And if you are demanding smart cars with smarter technology, then the whole field is going to be different. Then if we demand zero emissions and electric cars, these electric cars, I wouldn't know how to fix them. Someone would know how to fix them. For example, in the story of McFlurry, there was a fix. There was an electronic fix from a rival company, and that designed a software or something to plug into the McFlurry machine. So this is something you can do if you know the science behind the software. So it's not like you cannot do anything about it. You can, but you gotta be smart and learn the ropes and learn how to code.
It's worth noting as well that legislators in the UK and across the European Union and in the US kind of agree with the principles of the right to repair movement. And the UK has got a new law as of July the 8th, which has built these stipulations for companies to have to allow for individuals, or at least accredited engineers who are not from the company in question that's made the goods, to be able to repair things. And Joe Biden just this month signed an executive order that demanded that the federal agencies responsible for the same kind of thing should prioritize consumers' rights to repair over there. So I think that we are seeing movement from lawmakers around the world to try to make it more possible for us to tinker with the stuff that we own.
Well, the right to end this episode, of course, rests solely with me, and I'm going to exercise that right now. My thanks to Sorcha, Abdul and Arion for their stories. Remember to follow this show for free. No need to wait for a service call. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.